Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another session of Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Sarah. I'm part of the education team here at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. And you have joined us for our habitat exploration. So we are going to take a look at some habitats today, and we're going to be exploring the animals that live there, what makes up that habitat. We're going to make some observations, look at some of the different animals, and we're going to focus on some adaptations too. Now, I know I just threw a bunch of big words at you, so we're going to break some of those words down to get a little bit of a better understanding of what we are going to be looking at today. But first, we're going to put up a phone number. If you find that you have any questions, you can text us in. So it's not quite a phone number, it's a text number. And that number is right here. So I can get my pointing right here. It's 562-286-1838. And if you have any observations you'd like to share with us, if you have any questions about the animals we're looking at today, go ahead and text us those questions and we'll try and answer them on air today. Now, I'm not alone here in the studio. I have Kaya, who's going to be changing all the screens behind me, and Dana is going to be taking your questions. So send us those questions. I do want to let you know that data and text rates do apply. And if you're one of our younger viewers, just make sure you have adult permission before you text us in. But we love to hear everything you want to share with us. Now, like I said, we're going to be exploring some habitats. So first off, exploring. What does it mean when we say we want to explore something? So here at the aquarium, we do a lot of exploring. And the way we explore is we look around us. We talk about what we notice, what we see, maybe some behaviors of animals. So we're really making observations. We're looking at something and we're sharing and discussing what it is we see happening in that place or that image. So that's what we're going to do in our exploration today. And now we're going to focus on habitats. So what is a habitat? Think about it. Have you heard that word before, habitat? There are habitats all around the world. There's habitats on land, and there's ocean habitats as well. Now, sometimes when we say think of an ocean habitat, I hear the Pacific Ocean. And here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, we do focus on animals that live in the Pacific Ocean. But if we were to dive down into the water and look around, we'd find a lot of different places where animals live. They don't all live in one place. Their homes don't look the same for every animal in the ocean. Their homes and their community and the things around where they live look really different. And so we're going to dive in and explore two of the habitats that we specialize here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. Now that we are open, if you come join us, you'll get to see these two habitats, and we're going to do a comparison. So we're going to look at both habitats and maybe talk about what looks the same or what might look different between those two habitats. All right, so let's take a look at our first habitat. Right here behind me, this is our blue cavern exhibit. Now, this is live footage, so we have a camera in our blue cavern, and you can log onto our website and watch this camera anytime. So this is live footage of blue cavern. Now, I'm going to step off, and I want you to make a couple observations. So we're going to take a moment, and what do you see when you look at this exhibit? What animals do you see? What kind of movement are they doing? Are there any colors that you notice? Maybe any shapes? What things do you see in this exhibit? So go ahead, you can share those observations with yourself. You can share them with anyone you're watching with. If you're there with an adult and they're working, you can whisper those observations, or you can even text us in those observations. All right, let's see. I'm going to make some observations what I see in this exhibit. I see lots of groups of fish. There were some fish over there, and then all the way over here, I see some really tiny little fish there. Oh, I'm going to get out of the way. I see an eel right here. It kind of looks like its body's similar to a snake going across the screen. Oh, there's one of those schools of fish. I also see rocks. We've got some big rocks here. And I see some sand down at the bottom. And then I also see these long things right here. There's some more here, all over. What do you think this is? Now, this is a really special habitat that we have here at the aquarium and here along our coast. So this is our Blue Cavern exhibit, and it represents Blue Cavern, which is a real dive site off the island of Catalina, which is about 23 miles from Long Beach here. And what's special about this habitat is it's called a kelp forest. I heard from Dina that we're getting lots of observations. People see fish, or some of you viewers see fish and kelp and rocks. Excellent job, observers. Excellent job, scientists, making those observations. So the kelp forest, we say it's unique. Now, if you live in Southern California, it doesn't seem so unique because we're kind of used to it. But it is unique because kelp needs really special water in order for it to survive. It needs really cold, and very nutrient-rich, clear water. And so kelp forests are only found in about 5 or 6 places around the world, and our coastline is one of those. Now, kelp forests are home to many animals, and sort of the basis of that food chain or basis of that habitat is that kelp. Now, kelp, sometimes we think of it as a plant. It's actually what we call an algae. It's not a plant. It doesn't have a root system where it burrows into the ground to get nutrients. It actually has what we call a holdfast. So it kind of looks like a tangle of roots, but they're exposed, and they attach to a rock, like you see right here, or right over here, or right over here. And those holdfasts attach to a rock, and then the kelp is going to grow upwards towards the surface, looking for the sun. And it's going to use that sun for energy. And we're going to get another view. Excellent. This is a footage of a kelp forest out in the open ocean. And you can see that sun coming in, and the kelp really wants to grow towards that sunlight. The more sunlight it gets, the healthier that kelp is, the more it can grow. Now, kelp in ideal conditions, so when there's clear water, a lot of sunlight, and the water is nice and cool, kelp can grow about 2 feet a day. So that's going to outgrow most of us in just a couple of days. Now, once kelp hits the ocean surface, do you think it pops out like a tree and goes really tall? No, it does still need that water. So what happens is it grows towards the surface, and then it folds over, and it creates sort of like a canopy, similar to a rainforest on land, where the trees grow towards the top and they create that canopy, sort of like a big umbrella up top. So the kelp forest creates a canopy. And the kelp forest is home to many animals, and in different zones too. So if we can break down that kelp forest, we're going to find different animals make their home in different parts of the kelp. So while the kelp forest is a habitat, the kelp itself becomes a habitat as well. So that holdfast, that very bottom that attaches to a rock, lots of little fish will hide in amongst those parts of that holdfast. And then, oh, this is a good image right here. So this is amber forest. This is right next to our blue cavern exhibit, and it's another example of a kelp forest. Now, this area would sort of be called the midwater. So this is sort of towards the bottom, but not quite in that holdfast. And there's lots of fish here that just, oh, and a shark. Can't forget our sharks. That just sort of hang out in the middle area of that kelp. And these fish you see here, most of these are different types of rockfish. And they just kind of move back and forth in the current that comes through the kelp, or the kelp forest, and that's where they're going to hang out, and that's where their habitat is. And then at the very top, I mentioned that canopy. A lot of animals will make their home in the canopy as well. Because think about it, that part that folds over creates an umbrella. It's a good place to hide. So a lot of animals might lay their eggs. A lot of fish will lay their eggs in the canopy. And another animal who uses that canopy a lot is a sea otter. Do you guys recognize this animal? It's very friendly, very cute animal that we love here at the aquarium. And they will wrap themselves up in those blades of kelp. And that way, when they're taking a nap, they don't float away. So they use that canopy as part of their habitat. Now, if we go back to that blue cavern exhibit, if we take a look at some of these animals. So the animals all live in this. Oh, we found a new animal. Who's this right here? Does anyone recognize what that is? It's a diver. So we even have divers who go into our exhibits. They're cleaning, they're feeding, they're taking care of all. Oh, and we've got another diver coming down. Here we go. We can see their flippers. We can watch them. So this is happening live. If you're here watching at the aquarium, you'll see these divers just like you're all tuning in and watching with us right now. Now, the animals in this habitat, they have special adaptations. So that's another word that I threw into for you today. Adaptations. Now, what is an adaptation? Think about if you've heard that word before. Adaptation. A lot of times we hear that word adapt. Oh, it must be feeding time. Got a little frenzy going on behind us. It's pretty fun to watch. All these surprises we see when we watch our live webcams. Oh, it looks like he's coming right on top of me. So an adaptation, if we think about what an adaptation is something special or specific on an animal's body that helps them survive in their habitat. So it's sort of like a tool or a behavior or some part of an animal's body that helps them survive in where they're living. This is really cool. It's happening right behind us. It's prime feeding time. So we call it a feeding frenzy because these fish are going crazy trying to get their food as the diver is tossing them their food. That's pretty cool to watch. Now back to adaptation. So animals all have unique adaptations that are going to help them survive in their habitat. Now think about land animals for a second. To help us understand this concept of adaptations, think about a giraffe. What is special about a giraffe that's different from all other animals? Think about what looks different on a giraffe than other animals. If you said their neck, you're right. So giraffes have a really long neck that allows them to eat the leaves at the top of the trees that other animals aren't able to reach. And that is an adaptation. Think about a monkey. What's special about a monkey? They have hands. They have feet that kind of look like hands. And they also have a tail. And they can use their hands and their feet and their tail to help them climb. What about those thumbs that monkeys have? Who else has those thumbs? We do. And those thumbs help them do a lot of things that other animals can't do, and that's another adaptation. So all those things on those animals' body, the thumb, the feet, the tail, the neck of the giraffe, are all adaptations. They're all tools that help animals live in their habitat. So think about, in a place like this, like our amber forest, or even blue cavern, or just a kelp forest in general, what kind of adaptations do you think animals have? What helps these animals live in their habitat? Well, let's see, this group right here is displaying one really good adaptation. They're all together, right? They're not really social distancing. These fish don't need to. They actually find safety in numbers. So we call it a school of fish. When a group of fish are all together, we call it a school. If they're just kind of lazing around together, we call it a shoal. But all tight together, just like we see here in Blue Cavern, these fish are schooling. And they school together for a really important reason. Because these fish, even though they might look big on this screen, they're actually really small. They're only about this big. And so that might be easier for a predator, a larger fish, to come eat them. But when these fish are all together in that big group, it makes it a lot harder for a predator to single out one individual fish because there's so many of them swimming together. So safety in numbers makes one little fish look like a bigger fish, and it makes it much harder for predators to get them. So that's one adaptation of these animals here in the kelp forest. Now there are some fish who might blend in with the kelp. There's a fish called a kelp fish, and they're pretty much the same color and shape as a blade of kelp, and so they can hide amongst the kelp and no animals can see them. And so some animals might be the exact same color of their surrounding habitat, and that helps them blend in. That eel we saw before, remember we saw that eel kind of snake its way across? Oh, just like this, get out of his head. Our moray eel. Look at the color of its body. What color do you see? Its eye is kind of blue, but the rest of its body is pretty much a green and kind of a mix of brown color. And this eel's body is pretty much the same color as that kelp we saw when we were looking at Blue Cavern, or even amber forest, or even the kelp in the open ocean. And so the color of this animal's body allows it to blend in with its surrounding, and then it's harder for predators to find this animal. And so camouflage, blending in with their surroundings, is another great adaptation that a lot of animals will use so they can blend in. Excellent. All right, so we talked about our kelp forest. We saw some blues and greens as far as colors. We saw rocks. We see some divers. We saw some schools of fish. We saw our eel and our shark. Let's take a look at another habitat. So we're going to move over to our tropical gallery, and I want you to look at what maybe looks the same or what looks different from our kelp forest. So we're going to take a journey to perfect timing. This is our grouper passing by. We'll wait till he gets out of the way, and then I'm going to step off, and I want you to make those observations again. What do you notice about this exhibit? Oh, looks like we've got some divers in here as well. What things do you see in this exhibit? Does it look the same? Does it look different? What do you see? Do you see any colors? The sun is shining in this exhibit. Gives it kind of a yellow kind of tinge to it. But look closely and see if you notice any other colors or any number of animals or maybe what the animals are doing. Go ahead and make those. Ooh, there's an eagle ray. Make those observations. All right. I see a shark, first off, right there. I also see a lot of fish, but these fish look a little bit larger than some of the fish we were looking at in Blue Cavern, and they're less schooling fish. Ah, Bella, thanks for watching again. We know you've been watching all day, and it's so nice to hear from you again. Bella sees coral, absolutely. So this is a coral reef habitat. So we looked at a kelp forest, and now we're looking at a coral reef. So all of this stuff here, all this different shapes and colors and even textures that are all along these rockwork, that is all coral. What else do we see? I see some fish. I see a couple bigger fish and some sharks. Now, these sharks do look larger than that leopard shark we saw in Blue Cavern. And I see a lot more bright colors. So that's one of the most noticeable differences, I think, between the kelp forest and the coral reef is the color. So the kelp forest has some blue tones, some greens, maybe browns. There's a couple other brighter colored fish, but for the most part, it's more those earthy neutral tones. If you look at our kelp or our coral reef, you're going to see a lot more bright colors. Now, do we have any close-ups of coral itself? So we're going to take a closer look. Excellent. So here is a closer look at what this habitat looks like. So coral is actually a living animal. Kind of looks like a rock sometimes. It doesn't always move, although we do have some moving corals right here. Some of our softer corals might move in the current a little bit. But corals, they are a hard, rocky animal. So there's a tiny little animal. It's called zooxanthellae that lives inside that coral structure. And there's an algae inside that uses the sunlight for energy and helps it build this hard calcium structure. And that's what makes those corals look all different shapes and sizes and textures. And that algae gives it different colors as well. So corals can come in any range of colors. We see corals in greens and blues and pinks and purples, the whole rainbow. And the fish that live in that habitat, take a look. What do you notice about some of these fish right here? Ooh, right there. Just swam by. What do you notice about these fish? When we were looking at our kelp forest, a lot of the fish were kind of silvery, kind of lighter colors. But in our kelp forest, we get a range of colors. So our fish are much brighter in the coral reef than they are in the kelp forest. Now, why do you think that is? Why would we find brighter colored fish in a place like the coral reef versus a place like the kelp forest? What do you think? So just like we talked about the eel blending in and camouflaging with the kelp, these fish, they are going to blend in as well. So the bright colors on their body help them blend in with the bright colors of the coral. Now let's take a closer look at some of the animals that we might find in a coral reef. Maybe an animal, like this one. Excellent. This is called an angelfish. And we get a really good view of all those bright colors. And not only bright colors, but different patterns. So we sort of have some spots right here at the front. We've got solid. We've got this sort of mishmash of blue and yellow. We even have this spot right here. Now, if we're talking about adaptations of these animals, things that these animals have on their body to help them survive in the habitat, if we look at this spot right here, this is actually an adaptation. And we see it in a lot of fish and other animals as well. It's called a false eye spot. So take a look at our angelfish. Where do you think its actual eye is? Do you think that spot I was pointing to is its actual eye? Nope. Its eye is all the way over here. But this spot right here makes it look like it has a bigger eye. Now, big eyes in the ocean can be sort of a threatening thing. The bigger the eyes, the scarier the animal might look. Or it might just be distracting. If a predator is trying to eat an animal like an angelfish, and they're looking for the head of the animal, so they're looking for the eye. They know if they find the eye, they'll find the head. And if they look at this fish and they see this thing that looks like an eye, they might go for that eye. But is that the head of the animal? Nope, they are mistaken. And so this false eye spot helps protect these animals. That's an excellent animal to look at in our coral reef. What other animals can we look at in the coral reef? Maybe an animal that makes its home in another animal, an anemone. Do we have any clownfish we can take a look at? Excellent. So this is another popular animal that we find in our coral reefs. And these are a really cool, special animal. So they make their home in the coral reef, but they make their habitat in a specific animal found in a coral reef. So take a look at this picture. What does it look like this clownfish is hiding or playing in? Does this animal look familiar to anyone? It's a relative of coral. Coral is in a family called cnidarians. And the special thing about cnidarians is they all have stinging cells. So they're able to sting their prey as to catch their food or for protection. And this animal right here that the clownfish is playing in or hiding in is called an anemone. So we have anemones here along our coast, cold water animals like this anemone here. But there's also a lot of anemone species that we find in the coral reef in warmer water. And clownfish make their home in those anemones. Now, like I said, anemones are part of the cnidarian family. So they have stinging cells. So all these tentacles here, there we go. They have stinging cells and they can sting their prey. If you ever touch an anemone, which they are safe for us to touch, it feels like you're touching tape. It's kind of sticky. And if we were to look really closely with a microscope at those tentacles, we would see there's sort of a little harpoon wound up in a cell in those tentacles. And anytime something touches or disturbs that cell, it shoots that harpoon, and that's the sting. Now, we can touch those animals, because our skin is really thick. We have so many layers of skin that little harpoon and sting can't go through our skin. But for most fish that have just a thin layer of scales, they might get stung if they try and swim through the anemone. So why do you think the clownfish can live in anemone without being stung? It comes back to adaptations. So the clownfish has a really special adaptation that allows it to live in this anemone. Its body is covered with an extra layer of slime. So it has this thicker slime coating on its body, so when it goes through the anemone, it doesn't feel its sting. And the anemone doesn't mind the clownfish living there because the clownfish protects the anemone from any predators. So they have this relationship where they both benefit from being together. And so our clownfish is one of those popular animals we find in the coral reef. Now let's take a look, maybe go back to our coral reef exhibit, because there's something really cool about this coral reef exhibit specifically. So this area is modeled after a dive site called Blue Corner. It's off the coast of Palau, which is a tropical island. And the special thing about Blue Corner is it was one of the first places that was established as a shark sanctuary. Now, what does that mean to be a shark sanctuary? Well, sharks are really important in our ocean. Sometimes we think sharks can be really scary, or why would we need sharks in the ocean? But they're actually super important. They are what we call an indicator species. Now, what that means, we've got a shark right here. This is our zebra shark. An indicator species means that sharks let us know if our oceans are healthy. So our coral reef is a really important exhibit here. And it's a really important habitat. And if this habitat can support all the animals that need to eat all the way up to sharks, who are at the very top of the food chain, then it's a healthy ocean. If we think about our food chain, right, there's a really small animal like our coral, and there's maybe a little fish that eats the coral, and then a bigger fish eats that fish, and then a larger fish eats that fish, and then a shark eats that fish. We have this food chain. Now, if there's enough coral to support that little fish, and enough little fish to support that bigger fish, enough bigger fish to support that bigger fish who supports the shark, that means our oceans are healthy. So having a really healthy shark population is a really good thing for our oceans. And Blue Corner was made a shark sanctuary, so all these sharks here are protected. Now, in our Blue Corner here, we have two different types of sharks. We have zebra sharks, like this one right here. They're just so cute. We have zebra sharks, and we also have a type of hammerhead called bonnet heads. They're the smallest of the hammerhead. Now, something fun about our zebra sharks. Take a look here. Now, I keep calling it a zebra shark, but tell me, do you see any pattern that looks like a zebra? Not really. Now, that makes us sound kind of silly, like we don't really know our animals. But this animal is native to Australia. And if you go to Australia and you see a shark that looks like this, they'll call it a leopard shark, which sounds like a more appropriate name, right? But if you are here in California and you're looking at our blue cavern and you see a shark that we have there, we're going to call that shark a leopard shark. So it's very confusing if we call both of those sharks, especially because we have both of them here. If we call them both leopard sharks, it gets very confusing. So we call these zebra sharks because when these sharks are born, when they hatch out of an egg, they actually have vertical black and white stripes and look like a zebra. So even though it might sound confusing now, there is a reason why we call these zebra sharks. So our zebra sharks are one of the sharks that we have in that exhibit in Blue Corner. Now we also have, like I said, our hammerhead, perfect. So this is called a bonnet head, and it's the smallest of the hammerhead sharks. Now, another misconception is that sharks are really big animals. Now they're about, ooh, this is cool to watch it swim. They're such beautiful animals. Now these are sharks. There's about 450 species of sharks in the ocean, which is a lot of different types of sharks. But about half of those sharks are only 3 feet or smaller. So that means they're smaller than me. And our bonnet head, they look kind of like a baby hammerhead, but they're actually full grown. And they're only about 3 feet. So we can watch this shark, or take a look at this shark. Now, if we go back to adaptations, let's think about what kind of adaptations this shark, or even our zebra shark, might have. And there's one that has to do with the color of this animal. So we talked about back when we looked at Blue Cavern, the eel was green, and it helped it blend in with its habitat. And then we looked at the angelfish, it was all different colors and different patterns. And that helped it blend in with the coral. But what about our zebra shark or even that hammerhead? So the hammerhead was kind of a silvery gray color. And the zebra shark is a lot of different colors on the top. But what we don't see on the bottom is they're going to be a really light color on the bottom. And that hammerhead was light on its belly and darker on its top. And this is something we commonly see in a lot of animals in every different habitat, from birds to fish to sharks. This is a perfect example. This is another shark we'd find in the tropical waters, like in Palau. This is a black tip reef shark. And this is a perfect example of what I was saying, that adaptation. If we look at its belly, it's white. If we look at the top of its body, it's going to be a darker gray. They kind of range depending on the type of shark, gray, black, kind of bluish. But it has that two different colors, and that is something called countershading. And that means that an animal is protected from both angles. So think about, this shark is swimming along, and let's say we're swimming along too, and we're below the shark, and we look up, and the sun is shining down. That white belly is so bright, it's going to blend in. So if we're down below the shark and we look up, we may not be able to see that there's a shark there. Now think about if you're on a boat, and you're out looking for animals, and you look down at the water, what color does the water appear? Pretty dark blue, right? Even in a place like Palau, it's going to be a bright blue color. So the back of this animal is going to blend in with that water. So countershading allows these animals, we see it in sharks, we see it in fish, like I said, birds, lots of animals employ this where they're darker on one side and lighter on the other, and that allows them to be protected from multiple angles. So that's another great adaptation that we find in these animals here. Now, we have a couple minutes left. I want to talk about another animal that we have here, maybe one that eats coral. So going back to our coral reef, this animal here, I'm sitting in front of its face again, this animal here is called a parrotfish. And we have some parrotfish here. We have a new parrotfish. It's very cute. These are super colorful animals. They live in the coral reef, and they play a really important role in that coral reef. Now, that bright colors that you see on this animal are one of its adaptations. But this animal has another adaptation as well. Take a look at this mouth. They're one of my favorite fish because it always looks like they're smiling at us. They're the happiest fish in the ocean. But that mouth actually has a beak at the end, sort of like a bird's beak. And what this beak is used for is for eating. So what the parrotfish does is they eat coral. Now, they don't really want the hard structure of that coral. They're trying to get that algae and that animal on the inside. So they're going to eat the coral, and then they actually poop out the hard parts. And that's how we get all those nice white sandy beaches, is actually from parrotfish poop. Sounds kind of gross, but that's part of life, right? Anytime we eat something, we have to release the waste. And parrotfish just happen to release that coral as sand. But they are going to use that beak, that hard mouth, to munch on coral. And they're going to get the animal on the inside and then release that waste. And that sounds like a bad thing to be eating the coral, right? But they actually help the coral reef because they make room for new coral reefs to grow. Now, another cool adaptation of this animal, because if you thought pooping out sand was bad enough, this animal likes to make a sleeping bag out of mucus. You heard that right. At night, when this animal is trying to sleep or take a rest, it will cover itself in a thick, thick layer of mucus. There's a lot of slime going on in the ocean, but it's actually really good for these animals to have this slime on their body. It's another way that they protect themselves, another adaptation. So this sort of mucus sleeping bag helps protect the animal from any predators while this animal is trying to rest. So it sounds kind of gross, but it's actually really important for this animal to be able to protect itself. All right, we have just a couple minutes left. Let's go back to our coral reef habitat. Let's take a look at our... Oh, here's a nice little picture while we're waiting. Kaya's going to get that live cam up again. Let's see if we can make a couple more observations just before we go. So we've got a lot of animals in here, a lot of life. Now, something really interesting about Blue Corner is the way our exhibit is designed, there's one wall that has nothing on it, and that represents the open ocean. And at the real Blue Corner, what happens is there's sort of this reef and then the wall and then the open ocean, and there's a big current. And what that current does is it brings water into this habitat, and that water carries a lot of nutrients, and that's why we're able to have so much life in this exhibit. Now, all these animals, they have different adaptations. So even though they all live in the same habitat, they have different ways of protecting themselves and surviving in their habitat. We talked about the countershading for some of those fish, those sharks. We talked about the eating coral and the mucus sleeping bag, sort of, for that parrotfish, and the bright different colors on the angelfish. So even though these animals all live in the same habitat, they have different adaptations. Now, as you go out and explore the world around you, you'll notice every animal, every living thing has its own types of adaptations. Let's think about it for a moment. Do you have any adaptations that help you live in your habitat? Let's think about it. What adaptations might we have? We already talked about thumbs. Our thumbs are a huge adaptation. But our legs and our arms, our skeleton is an adaptation. Our hair protects our head. So we have tons of adaptations too. And as you go explore, take a look and see if you can identify any adaptations for the animals or the things that you find around you. Well, excellent job, scientists. Thanks for exploring with us today. We are out of time, but we have one more program today. You can join us next hour and learn about bioluminescence and the deep sea. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a good rest of your day.